Hey everyone, it's now been I think 5 months since I got my first Sony PXW-Z200 camera, and I've used it for quite a few events now, and I wanted to do kind of a follow-up video and let you know what I think about the camera, actually having used it in real world situations and having had it for a little while. So with that actually stated, let's go ahead and just jump right on in. Okay, so this is Sony PXW-Z200. This is a camcorder style camera. This is one that Sony introduced. They announced it back in August, I believe it was, and started shipping by September. I got one right away. It looked like a pretty significant upgrade over the Z150s that I had been using for how many years? Almost 8 years, over 8 years actually. And you know, I've really liked my Z150s, and they've been great. But it was getting a little bit long in the tooth, and I knew that this new camera was something that I might be interested in. So I got one, and I've used it for, I don't know how many events, but it's quite a number of them at this point. So I've now had a little bit of chance to become more familiar with it, learn some of its quirks, learn its strengths, learn its weaknesses, and kind of share a little bit of my opinions here on the video today. So, well, first of all, overall summary, what do I think of it? Well, let me answer that question with demonstration. I now have 3 of them, if that says anything. So, and I actually do plan to get at least one more. So I am that impressed with the camera that I decided it was worthwhile to start to phase out my 150s and use the 200s for events as much as I can moving forward. That doesn't mean I'm selling my 150s. In fact, I'm hanging on to them. Gonna have a ton of cameras at this point, but I do have enough times where I need more than 3 or 4 cameras for large events or for situations where I have multiple events going on in one day. And so I'm hanging on to the old ones, and I'm going to continue to use those, but they're not going to be my primary cameras from this point forward. So from now on, the 200 is my primary camera for all the events that I shoot. So with that said though, I'm going to sort of reconfigure things here a little bit, and I'm going to shoot the remainder of this video on one of these cameras so you can get a little better feel for what that actually looks like. So I'll go ahead and reconfigure, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I've got the 200 set up. You're still seeing me on my PXW-Z90V, and as of right now, you're now seeing me on the Z200. So overall image is fairly similar. I'll kind of cut back and forth a little bit here. With some tweaking, the images on the 2 cameras can be sort of to line up a little bit. But I do find that the 200 is just a little bit flatter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is not quite as vibrant. It's not quite as sharp as the image on the 150. But with a few settings tweaks, I can get them to line up well enough. And ironically, it's actually settings on the 150 that allow that to happen, because the color settings on the 200 aren't quite as robust as those that are on the 150. They're not bad, but the 150 actually does have more options for tweaking the look and feel of the image. So, but aside from that though, the image on the 200 is actually quite a bit more detailed. So even though the 150 appears to be more sharp with its factory settings, I always turn that down a little bit because it always appears just a little bit too sharp. It's adding just a little bit too much artificial detail, so I always dial that back a bit. Whereas on the 200, I had to dial it up a little bit in order to make it look more like the 150. In fact, the camera actually, I think because it has the same heritage as the FX6, is just inherently a little bit softer, a little bit more, designed to be a little bit more cinematic than the 150 was, where that has a heritage more in line with consumer camcorders, where sharpness is kind of everything in terms of the apparent clarity of the image. Neither one is technically correct or incorrect, but I did find that the 200 does require just a little bit of boost in the detail in order to give the sharpness that we're kind of used to out of Sony cameras that we've had in the past. Now, in terms of the workflow with the cameras, the menus on the 2 are extremely different, not even close to being the same, but I did find that I've adjusted to the 200 pretty quickly and haven't had an issue with that in any kind of way. Features that 150 has, the 200 lacks. There aren't really that many of them. In fact, I can't even think of any at the moment. But there are quite a few features that the 200 has that the 150 did not. And also addresses some of the limitations that the 150 had. The biggest one that's been kind of a game changer for me, on the 150, if you were shooting in 4K, and you wanted to be able to output that video through one of the outputs on the back of the camera, SDI or HDMI, you were limited to HDMI. And once you started recording, the screen would go black. The little LCD screen on the side of the camera would actually go black. It's not capable of outputting images to both the LCD screen and the outputs at the same time, and SDI didn't work at all for 4K. Those limitations have been addressed in the 200, and it's capable of outputting to the screen, SDI and HDMI all at the same time, and you can actually set the SDI and HDMI to be different formats if you want. So you could have the SDI outputting 4K and the HDMI outputting in HD if you wanted. You've got the capability of doing that, and those outputs are both active simultaneously. Now, outputting to both SDI and HDMI simultaneously isn't something you always would need. And very often one output is sufficient, but occasionally there are times when it's actually kind of inconvenient, particularly because those can output different formats. I've got an event coming up here in a couple of days where I need to be able to output an HD image via SDI, and I can go ahead and output a 4K image on the HDMI for an on-camera monitor, so in order to monitor with the best, highest resolution. And that, while we're doing that, we can actually record in 4K at the same time. So there's definitely times when that comes in very handy, and lack of limitations in terms of when you can use the LCD screen and output to the outputs on the back is certainly a very welcome change. Now, I just kind of give you a little bit of feel for what I'm talking about in terms of detail, image detail. So I'm actually shooting this on the Z90V, which is not completely identical to the 150 that I've had in the past, but it's the same family, and so they're very, very similar. So this is the image on the Z90, and then I'll switch over here to the image on the Z200. And also, as I'm doing that, I'll crop in a little bit and let you see kind of the per pixel level of detail that's available on the two cameras as well. So back to the Z90 here for a moment, and then we'll go back to the 200. Now, as mentioned, I did find that the amount of actual real detail in the 200 is considerably more, and in addition to that, it has a lot less noise on it than the older camcorders actually did. I think that is owed at least as much to the improved noise reduction in the camera as anything. I think the sensor probably has a similar amount of noise inherently, but the noise noise reduction on the 200 is certainly not a lot better than I ever saw on the other cameras. Now, that said though, it's very possible that the 200 is more sensitive to light. So I've never had a situation where I've had to use an ND filter indoors until I got my 200. An event I did 2 weeks ago, I think it was. I had the 200, we were using 200s, and there was a stage and it was lit properly, but the 200, we actually had to engage the ND filter in order to not blow it out. So we either have to use ND or drop to F11, and that was with the gain set to 0 dB. So it seems the camera actually might be quite a bit more sensitive to light than the 150 and 90 were. That said though, as I'm shooting here in my little basement studio, the settings on the two cameras are the same in terms of exposure. So I haven't done a full qualitative analysis on it, but it does seem like the 200 is more sensitive to light and is able to pick up a brighter image in darker conditions than the older cameras ever actually were. I will be doing a more thorough and technical analysis comparing the two cameras. Here we're back on the Z90 here before too long. I just need to have a couple of days where I don't have anything else going on, where I can actually go out and purposely shoot on both cameras simultaneously, so you can do an A/B comparison in various different conditions to really get a better idea for what the two cameras actually look like. But again, I do believe that the 200 actually does have a slightly more detailed image and is more sensitive to low level light as well. In terms of things like the bokeh behind subject, it's going to be roughly the same, maybe a little bit less of background blur on the 200, because it's the iris that you can use throughout the entire zoom range is all the way up at 4.5, whereas on the other cameras it was at 4.0. So very slight difference, but there might be situations where that actually might come into play. So let's see, what else? So there is one thing about the 200s that I don't love. That's the battery life. This camera goes through batteries a lot faster than my other cameras ever did. So if I'm lucky, I can get about an hour out of the battery that's included with the camera, whereas on the older ones I could easily get at least 2 hours with the factory provided battery and the 200. that's getting an hour is kind of pushing it. And I've had a couple situations where the battery is basically dead before an hour. So it does seem to go through batteries quite a lot faster. In addition to that, the batteries are a lot more expensive on this one than they were with the other ones. So the new ones use the BPU series that Sony's been using on some of their higher end camcorders and some of their cinema cameras for quite a while, whereas the older ones use the NPF batteries, which were a lot more affordable. So there is that downside. It's just kind of the way that it is. Speaking of power though, one thing that again I don't love, but it's not a deal breaker in any kind of way whatsoever, that the 200 does not charge the battery on camera ever, whereas the older cameras would actually charge the battery when the camera power is turned off. That was always really convenient. You get done shooting, flip off the power on the camera, leave it connected to power, and it charge the battery. With these new ones, you have to use the charger that they provide in order to charge the battery, and that charger is powered by the same power adapter that you have on the camera, so you're not able to power the camera off AC power and charge a battery at the same time. You wouldn't need to invest in additional equipment to actually make that happen. Now, one of the things that I actually really like about the 200, it's a huge improvement over their older, lower end cameras, is the way that it handles audio. So with the new 200 series, it actually records 4 channels of audio simultaneously, and you can choose where those 4 channels actually come from. You got options of the internal microphones, you can do XLR, you can do a little 1/8 inch jack, and then if you happen to have some of Sony's wireless microphones that feature the MI shoe capability, then you can actually have that as an additional source as well. I suppose that also means that you could use some of Sony's MI shoe XLR inputs and be able to add a 3rd and 4th input channel on an XLR just by putting that on the camera and setting that to channels 3 and 4. So very convenient there, and I think there's going to be a lot of situations where I take advantage of that. I already have. In a lot of situations, I have channels 3 and 4 set up just to record the internal microphone. That way I have kind of a reference track to what's going on, or I can use that to catch audience reaction or any number of things. And so that's especially convenient considering that I use Blackmagic switchers, and with some of their recent firmware updates, you're able to route some of those additional channels above channels 1 and 2 into your final program output and then record those separately. So a lot of the events that I've been doing recently, I'll take the ambient sounds from one of my 200s, map that to channels 3 and 4 in my program audio and record that, and then that will just be there in case we need to include any of that audio in the final delivery, or use that as a reference track if we need timing information or whatever. So very cool there. But something that's kind of somewhat related to audio is timecode, and since the 200 actually has a timecode input and output on the back, it makes it really convenient when you're setting up multiple in order to make sure your timecode across all your cameras is the same. If you're shooting in a situation where you don't have an external timecode source, you can use one of your cameras, one of your 200s, as the timecode generator, and then just take that output of that BNC jack on the back, split it, and then send that to your other cameras. If you need to send it to a lot, you probably want an audio distribution amplifier of some sort, but for a couple of cameras, you can get away with just a Y splitter and send that out to multiple cameras. And then they'll sync up to that, and then when you go to edit in post, your timecode on all your cameras is identical, and they will just line right up. I'll mention that having timecode line up does not mean that your frames on your cameras all start at the same point in time, so there's still going to be a little bit of a difference in synchronization across cameras, and the only way to get around that is to use Genlock, which these cameras do not have. If you want that from Sony in a camcorder, you have to step up to the Z280, which is supposed to be higher in this lineup than the 200, but there's a lot of features on the 200, a lot of capabilities on the 200 that are better than the 280. So whether the 280 is actually really a step up or not is a bit debatable. So anyway, so timecode is included on the 200s, but Genlock is not. So if you're looking for a camera that has Genlock, you probably have to look at a different model elsewhere. All right, for the next little bit, I want to take you through some of the features on the camera that I actually really like quite a lot, and that's one of the easiest ways to do that is going to be to actually just go through some of the user interface and some of the menu. So first of all, I really do quite like this display here. That shows up on the LCD, and obviously here I've got it outputting to the recording here as well. But so let's start here in well, actually just start with part of the user interface. So on the camera, there's a button here. It's called Direct Menu, and I press that. It highlights a lot of these different options that are on here, and then I can use the joystick that's on there to navigate through those. Turn that back on. There we go. All right, so you can see the little yellow indicator there as I move through the different options. This allows me to control lots of different aspects of the camera without having to go into the full menus. So for example, if I wanted to go to white balance presets, there we got a few options that make this nice and easy. So I'm able to go easily do that. Or if I want to change the actual white balance number, you can see I'm able to do that right there. Come over here, change the whatever scene it's currently using, set the neutral density. So if I want to, for example, turn on neutral density to 1/4 there, and I can do that right there. I'm over here, toggle between auto and manual on some of these features, like here with the iris, it does disappear pretty quick. So by default well, I've got it set to manual, but if I want to change that, I can just hit the button here and then go to auto or go back to manual, whatever I want, and then actually adjust the number there as well. So in addition to having the normal control ring, it can also be done through the menu as well. So here we can only choose auto or manual for the gain in order to change which the high, medium, low setting you use. That actually does have to be done with the switch, but we can change what any of those actually are from right here. So let me, just for the sake of discussion here, I'm going to switch over to medium on there, okay? And that's currently set to 10 dB, but if I wanted the medium setting to be, for example, 6 dB, I can change that right there. Again, don't have to go into the menu, and then go to low. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong switch. There we go. No. Okay, go to low, 0, and then go back to medium. It's going to be set on the 6 that I just set it to a moment ago, but I can change that at any point. So go back to 10 on that. It's again, same thing over here. And then this ECS feature, it doesn't say what it stands for in the menu. I think that it probably like electronic control shutter or something along those lines. That has actually done a pretty good job about making sure that the camera synchronizes up with something like a LED wall behind the camera, or behind a subject. And I found that this camera is way better about that than some of the other ones that I've used in the past. And then next to that, the green, that's actually a level, so it lets you know if your shot is crooked, and I find that very handy a lot of times, especially when I'm using tripods that have the bowl and you have to kind of adjust it to make sure that it's level. This does help with that quite a bit. And then over on the right, bottom right corner there, we've got a 4-channel audio level display, and as you can see right here, I actually have all 4 channels going. So there's all that's pretty handy, but this same feature can actually be used for some other features that are over. Let's see, there we go. So auto exposure setting, I got it set to go half a dB down, or sorry, half a stop down. So this same feature also can be used to change some of these features up here in the upper left as well. So here's your steady shot settings, and we've got quite a few different options here that can be controlled all from this particular screen. So pretty handy there. In addition, I've actually really come to appreciate the quick menu that comes up when you just tap the menu button. This allows you to get access to a lot of the most important settings of the camera without having to wade through the full menus. So for example, here on this audio screen, it allows you to, I can press the joystick here and then control the level for the different audio channels, or even change the source. So if I wanted to change this from internal mic to shoe, I can do that right here, right within this menu, without having to navigate through the entire camera menu. So also very cool there. I also really like the fact that this camera has Sony's variable neutral density filter. That is a super cool feature, and I've heard some people complain about it, and I'm not really sure why, because I only see that this is as a plus. So let me just go ahead and engage the neutral density filter. There we go. And you can see that it's currently on, well, if you look in the lower portion of the image there on the lower left, it's ND1/6. So as I rotate that, you can see that it's actually changing what that neutral density amount is. And that's really handy to be able to change that in smooth gradations like that, without having to jump between discrete filters. That allows you to control the exposure in a much more natural way. So if you're shooting outdoors, or as I found in an indoor arena or whatever, where there is a lot of light, being able to control that exposure with the neutral density is super effective. So normally what we have to do is we have to change the iris, we have to change the gain, or we have to change the shutter speed in order to fix or set the appropriate exposure for a shot. Having the neutral density gives you a fourth one that doesn't change the look and feel of the image as all those other ones can. So changing the iris affects the depth of field, changing the gain affects the amount of noise in the image, and changing the shutter speed affects motion blur. And so being able to adjust the neutral density filter like that without having to adjust those other parameters gives you a much more natural, much more consistent way to adjust the exposure on an image. So that's a great feature to have, and I really do appreciate that quite a bit. Jumping over to the LCD screen, I love that the screen on this thing is a touch screen, which is super handy for when you're trying to make sure that the camera is focusing on the right thing. So you just reach up on the screen and tap on it, and then the camera will stay on that subject until it either leaves frame or you tell it another subject. And it does a pretty good job. I'm mostly pretty impressed with the autofocus. We have seen a couple of issues where the camera has trouble initially locking on the focus on something, and it seems to take a long time, especially in the heat of the moment, trying to find that particular focus point. So tapping on the screen can help, because at that point it knows what it needs to focus on. But sometimes it does indeed sort of get lost in trying to figure out what to focus on. It hasn't happened a lot with the various events that I've done, but I have seen it a number of times. So something to watch out for. And if you do end up getting one of these cameras and you find that your camera is not focusing on the right thing, always remember that you can tap on the screen and let it know exactly what you want it to focus on, and it will stay focused on that. And at this point it's actually figuring out what it wants to focus on its own. I have not told it, but if I want to actually specify what my intended subject is, all I have to do is really just tap on the screen wherever it is, and it will actually stay locked onto it. And it does a pretty good job. It doesn't update the screen as often as it does the focusing system, so you can see that the box is a little bit behind compared to the image, but it actually is tracking pretty well. And if I just do something goes out of frame briefly, it will lock up back onto it when it comes back in. But if it stays out of frame for more than a little bit, it will at that point trying to search. Well, there we go. It did lock back on again. But so if that stays off the screen for very long, it will then sort of reset and find a new target for it to track. So very cool. It does have the capability to prioritize faces, or to actually just lock on to just faces, which is certainly very handy if you have a subject who walks out of frame and you don't want the camera to instantly go into focus hunting mode. It will just turn off the autofocus when there's no people in the shot, and so that can be pretty handy there. So there we go. Let's focus on that for a bit, and then had a little trouble there because the boxes are all basically the same, but there we go. They kind of lock onto my other cameras there, and yeah. But I found that it actually does seem to work pretty well, so I've been pretty happy with the way that the focusing system on this camera actually works. I love the fact that this camera can actually record two different files at the same time. So, for example, I can record in 4K and 1080 at the same time. So that's super handy if you want to have a lower resolution proxy that you want to share with somebody, or you actually need two different resolutions for whatever. It's kind of handy to be able to do that. You can set that up to record on one of those formats on each of the two card slots in the back. I'll actually just go into the menu here and talk about some of the other things that I have on here. So first of all, it has this user menu, and I actually have customized this to have the features in it that I actually utilize the most. So as I go through here, formatting the media, setting the recording format, turning simultaneous recording on and off, setting the audio inputs, choosing a scene file, selecting the base setting, whether you're doing the flexible ISO or the custom mode. You have settings for HDR, which I haven't used much, but having the ability to apply a LUT to the image, that's pretty cool. But I would note that only works in one mode on the camera. I believe it's the flexible ISO mode, so you're not really able to utilize that for the normal mode of the camera. Turning steady shot on and off, selecting the rules for focusing. I mean, just for a moment, take me off there so you can actually see the full display. But lots of cool options for setting focus, and I've been pretty happy with those. Controlling peaking, having two different sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So being able to control whether the camera has clear image zoom turned on or off is kind of nice. Although I've never found a situation where having clear image zoom turned on is actually a problem. Setting the parameters for the handle on the top of the camera. Setting up connections for the network, and I'll get to more of that in a moment. I have actually played with that a fair amount at this point and do have some thoughts on that. Configuring the wireless network so you can connect to Wi-Fi. Setting the parameters for streaming. Changing the properties or the settings for the different assignable buttons. Controlling which menu settings are accessible. So if you want to loan the camera to somebody that you don't want them to screw it up, you can actually lock them out of certain options. And then you can choose the settings that appear in the user menu. So you go into the shooting menu. This is where you set all your parameters for how you want the camera to capture an image. So some pretty cool stuff there. It does have night shot if that's something that you're interested in. Allows you to capture images in ultra low light, almost like a night vision kind of thing. Not true night vision, but it is there. Not something most of us are going to use very often, but it is there. So this noise suppression feature, I would definitely turn this on. It is much better than the noise suppression that I've used on other cameras. It's cleaner. It doesn't seem to have as many artifacts as I've noticed on others. So I would definitely turn that on. Flicker reduce is for matching and flickering on certain types of lighting like fluorescent lights and whatnot. I would just kind of leave that on auto all the time. It doesn't seem to have any negative downsides. Steady shot is the stabilization basically. Alright, so base settings, so this is what I was talking about a moment ago. You either have custom or you have flexible ISO, and then you can select whether you're doing HLG or BT709. So that's basically SDR or HDR. Record format, you can set the number of frames per second, whether you're recording in one of these three formats here, and you can specify whether you're recording in 4K or 1080. The camera is basically completely abandoned 720. And anything, of course, standard definition as well. From here you can control the different quality settings. I do find this a little bit confusing, so I set that to high. It goes to 100 megabit, which makes sense, right? And I go to low, and it comes down to, what is it, 60? And then mid is also 60, which I don't really understand. And it gets even weird if I come up here and put it in XAVC SL422. And in that case, all of the different quality settings seem to have the same bit rate. So I don't know whether that's a bug or what's going on with that, but I'm not sure if it really is recording at the same bit rate all the time. I don't know why you would choose anything but highest quality. Anyway, so there is that. Those files do get big, and then that have the XAVC SI as well, which is, I believe, is the intra-frame. So every frame is recorded independently. It's not dependent on any of the previous ones. Makes for much faster editing, but as you can see, the bit rate does get kind of crazy when you're starting to do that. When you're recording at high bit rates like that, you really do need to get into the CF Express Type A cards. Even though the camera mostly can run on SD cards, when you get into the really high bit rates like that, you really do need a faster card in order to make that work. So anyway, I'll go back to the XAVC SL420 that I tend to record in most of the time. As also mentioned here, something I didn't know about when I first reading documentation on this camera, but you can see here for the number of frames per second. I come in here, and you actually get options for 100 and well, basically 120. And this is not the slow motion feature of the camera. It actually native records at this speed, which captures audio, which is something that it does not do in the slow and quick S&Q mode that Sony has for doing slow motion. So, and it does this both in 4K and 1080. So if you want to just shoot 120 frames per second, you can just do that right here, and you don't need to put it into that slow and quick mode. So I've got a sporting event coming up here in a week and a half, I guess it is, and we're going to be doing slow motion replay with it. And so on camera we're going to capture 120 frames per second, so that in post they can go back and really slow things down quite a lot. But at the same time it's doing that, it's outputting 60 frames per second on the SDI. So I'm able to do two different frame rates, one for capture and one for output at the same time. So pretty cool option there. Simultaneous record, this is where you record the same thing to both cards, and then proxy record is the one where you can actually, so we'll turn this on here, and you can specify the format it records in. So you can record in 1920, 16 megabit HEVC 1920 9 megabit, or AVC at 1280, which is basically 720p at 6 megabit. So that's where you're able to get the secondary proxy recording here on the camera. So that actually comes in super handy when you're doing FTP upload, and I'll kind of cover that a little bit more once I get to the networking features. This auto framing feature, this is the one that will zoom into an image. Let me go back to my image with me in the corner. This is the one where it's actually able to zoom in and follow a person around the screen. So I found that this actually does work pretty well. I was pretty impressed with how smooth and how natural it was. Almost like a fairly competent camera operator doing it. I mean, the downside is that you're not going to want to crop in too much, because at that point you're starting to interpolate pixels and you're starting to get a little bit soft on the image. But as long as you can stay at kind of a 2:1 to 2.5 to 1 ratio, it does look pretty good and does do a pretty good job. The odd thing about this feature is it does not work with SDI. So as soon as you start doing anything with this feature, if you start recording with this feature, the SDI output goes dead. So just a weird quirk of the camera. I have to assume that it's using the same scaler that it would normally use for SDI for this auto framing feature, but I don't know that for sure. The manual doesn't seem to specify. But anyway, that is actually a pretty cool feature, and I may be getting a fourth one of these cameras just to take advantage of that one feature alone, because that would be allowing me to set up a fourth camera in the back of a venue and set it sort of medium and just have it track and use that as if it was another camera operator without having to add another person to payroll. All right. So here's another cool feature. So I can go back to just the camera view. So the multifunction dial is the one on the left side of the camera that actually lets you navigate the menu. It's a little wheel that's towards the back of the camera. And this has a second. You can actually set this for a secondary function. And so I set mine for auto exposure level. What that allows me to do is adjust that AE level at any time, as long as I'm not in the menu, just by rotating that wheel. So if I find that the image is too bright and I have the camera in some sort of auto exposure mode of any kind, whether the camera is auto choosing your iris or your gain or your shutter speed or your neutral density, this allows you to adjust sort of the offset or its target exposure level. So you just very quickly grab the wheel and do that. As you can see, you can also set ISO gain, which would be super handy, and also you can do the audio input level. So pretty cool thing there. All right, skip that. So all file is the feature on here that allows you to save all the settings of the camera to a memory card for later recall. And so what I typically do on a shoot is I'll go through and set up one camera and then save those settings using the all file menu option. I save those on an SD card. It has to be in slot B. It's kind of a restriction that it has. It allows you to save those settings and then recall them on other cameras so that you know that everything matches exactly. I mentioned moments ago that this camera doesn't have quite as many settings for tweaking the overall look and feel of the image. It doesn't have as many as the prior series of cameras that I used, the Z150, etc. So it has some. So you know, here I've dropped the master black down 9.9. That makes the image a little bit more contrasty, just gives a little bit more punch. So you've got some options that you can control there. It has a knee setting, which so you control how it handles highlights that would normally clip, where you start to roll those off. Here's your detail level. So again, let's just go back to, there we go. So I can see that I've got mine turned up to +2. So just a very slight raise in the amount of detail in the image to sort of sharpen it up just a little tiny bit. And then matrix allows you to control the relationship between different colors. And then multi-matrix gives you more control over that. But again, these cameras don't have all the same settings that my prior cameras did. So slight disappointment that things aren't quite as robust in terms of number of features there. All right, timecode, it's all the same options that you would normally have. And I find it super convenient that I'm able to have this camera both generate and receive and use timecode from another camera. So that's super handy. So output settings. So here you can actually turn the SDI and HDMI on and off independently. So if you know you're never going to use HDMI, you can just turn it off and save yourself a little bit of power there. And then we come down here to output format. And this is actually set wrong at the moment. So it's actually outputting 1080i at 1920 by 1080. So I'm actually going to change that. I'm going to come up here and go up to 4K. You'll see the camera cycle a little bit. So there we go. So now we're actually outputting in 4K. So you're seeing the 4K image on there. You can see that over here on the right, it sort of gives you a summary of what's going on. So the left column there is what's output on SDI, and the right column is what's output on the HDMI. You can see they don't have to be the same. So if you wanted SDI to be in 4K and HDMI to be in 1080, you can do that. So not a ton of options that are available there, but it's nice to have the ability to do that. So I'm actually going to change that back. There we go. Okay, output display, that's where you can choose whether the menus appear on the output or not. That's how I'm able to do the menu system that you're seeing here on screen. Control which markers show up on screen. Peaking, you're able to control that. And zebra, I like that it has 2 levels, so you can do, you can actually cycle through the available settings with a button on the LCD screen. If I remember, I'll demonstrate that. Okay. Again, audio input, you can set where each of the 4 channels come from, with the source for each one of those things. And then audio output, you can choose which audio settings you're actually, or audio channels you're monitoring, and which ones are going to HDMI. Okay, so here we got color bars, and there's a couple different, few different options here. So just quickly turn those on. There we go. So, and then we've got a few different options in terms of which ones it's able to output. So there you go. So when you want to go to calibrate something, a display or whatever, you can actually do that coming from your camera. All right, let's see. We're kind of getting a little too into the weeds here. All right, so network setup. So the network features on this camera include the ability to stream out to the internet. You can do that either via RTMP or through SRT, and it's able to do that in H.264 or H.265. And if you do H.264, it will do up to 4K. In in H.265, it will only do up to 1080. I found that these features work okay. It probably wouldn't be my first choice. Well, it's definitely not my first choice in terms of how to get a network stream up and going, but it's nice that it's built into the camera. I did do some testing with it to see if I was able to reliably get video from the camera into a video production system, and I actually did that via OBS. So I had OBS listening for SRT, and I had output to a deck link, and that way I didn't have to get any separate hardware in order to be able to do streaming from the camera. The latency on it is not super high. I would say it's probably on the order of half to 1 second. So you wouldn't want to use that where you're intercutting between different cameras, some which are connected directly and others which are streaming. But if you need to pull in a remote feed, that latency is actually not too bad. The one problem that you're going to have with this, I've found though, is that the Wi-Fi on this camera is just not very good. If you're going to be reliant on doing any sort of streaming with this camera, I would highly suggest you use the Ethernet port on the back, or maybe USB-C going to a supported smartphone. I didn't spend a ton of time figuring out what devices were supported on USB-C, but I don't get the impression that it's a lot. When I hooked it up to a couple of 5G hotspots that I have, that did work just fine, no issues there. But network adapters, not so much luck there. But at the same time, that doesn't really matter because the camera does have Ethernet built right in. If you're going to do Wi-Fi, if you needed to do Wi-Fi on this, I would strongly suggest that you get an external Wi-Fi bridge of some kind, which takes your Wi-Fi signal, converts it to Ethernet, and then use the Ethernet port on the back of the camera. And then you can use the USB-C port on the back of the camera to power that if you want. So you don't have to have a separate battery bank or whatever in order to get that to work. But the Wi-Fi in this camera is just not very good, not very reliable. I've had very little luck in having it connect to and stay connected to a network. And that's kind of important for a couple different reasons. So first of all, if you want to be able to upload video clips in real time using FTP up to a server somewhere, you need to have a good solid connection. It does have the ability to retry, but it doesn't retry very often. So if you're in a situation where you want to get that footage up as quickly as possible, and your connection is kind of spotty, you'll probably find that the built-in Wi-Fi is just not going to cut it. One thing I would mention though is with the ability to record these lower resolution proxy files, you can set the camera to have those files be ended and create a new file every 30 seconds or 1 minute or a couple different settings. And then that allows you to start uploading those chunks, individual chunks, up to an FTP server as soon as it spills from one file to the next, which did work really well. As I was testing that, I found that very reliably I could see that those files would come in within a couple of seconds of the time that that particular clip ended. Otherwise, if you want to be able to upload footage using FTP, you have to end the recording. It will not upload a file that is currently being recorded at the same time. So you have to end the clip and then it will start uploading thereafter. One of the nice things about having the Ethernet port built into this is it is able to go at full speed. It's a 1 gigabit port. And when I was doing uploads, it was uploading at a full 1 gigabit, assuming the network that it was connected to was able to do that. But that meant that the clips came in faster than real time. So if I recorded for 5 minutes, even in 4K, that clip would be uploaded in a lot less than 5 minutes after I stop the recording and allow it to do that upload. It will do uploading in the background while it's recording, just not the current clip. So, interesting feature, and I can see some situations where that might be useful. One of the things I thought about using that for was this sporting event I have going on in a couple weeks where we need to do instant replay. This camera might actually be fast enough with FTP to record the clip, hit stop, have that clip upload to an FTP server, and start playback within a couple of seconds when that happens. So it's almost like a poor man's instant replay system, sort of like what we're seeing from Blackmagic with some of the changes they've been making in the last little while through DaVinci Resolve. But it's certainly not going to be as useful as a full-fledged instant replay system. But in a way, it's kind of nice because you can do 120 frames per second clips as part of that, and the FTP feature on here is pretty fast. And so the amount of time you'd spend waiting is not very long, and you might actually be able to get away with doing instant replay using just that feature alone. The other thing that this wireless and wired networking can be useful for, more the wired because of the reliability, is controlling the camera. I'm going to save the discussion for that for another video because I wanted to actually demonstrate it, dive into it nice and far. You see what it's actually really like to control these cameras from an iPad or iPhone or Android device. You do get an awful lot of flexibility there. You don't get to control absolutely everything on the camera, but you do get to control a lot and monitor the image. And you can monitor the image, up to 4 cameras simultaneously through that app. And I find that to be super, super cool. It's almost like, again, a poor man's camera control system, an RCU. So I want to give that a full video and really do it justice in terms of what the capabilities are, because it actually is really impressive. The one downside, again, is that you really do need to be on wired Ethernet for that to be able to work reliably, because the Wi-Fi on these cameras is just not that great. All right, so beyond the network setup, we've got options here for setting up the wireless LAN and the wired LAN. So you can either do like a static or DHCP for the IP address and a few other settings. When you can wireless LAN, you can either select one from a scan or manually enter the SSID on there. But again, I wouldn't really even consider using the Wi-Fi on this camera. It's just not very good. USB tethering is what the feature that allows you to upload clips via FTP through using a USB connected device, whether that be a cell phone or a hotspot. The file transfer is the feature that uploads files via FTP. I kind of covered that already, but streaming, the camera does have the ability to stream via RTMP or SRT, and you can have up to 3 groups of settings of 3 different servers that you use configured for each, and then from there you basically choose which of those 6 you want to use for streaming. And so if you got a few different destinations that you normally have to go to, you can keep 3 of those stored in the camera and not have to overwrite them every time you need it. So anyway, I certainly would like to know what you guys want to know about this camera. If you have any questions about what this thing is capable of, what it's like using it, you can certainly leave those in the description down below. But to kind of sort of summarize, as I mentioned at the beginning, I am impressed enough with this camera that I have already bought 3 of them, and we'll get at least 1 more, and maybe beyond that. We'll see. I was initially just thinking, maybe I'll use this whenever I need to do a solo event, solo camera event, single camera event, and I'll save my Z150s for multi-camera events. But after I've spent enough time with this, it alleviates enough of the quirks that my other cameras had, that I decided I really need to dive in and fully invest and make these become my new camera moving forward. And as to how it compares to sort of some of the other cameras in Sony's lineup, I can't really say. I have a limited amount of experience with the Z280, but when I did try the Z280, I didn't find it to be that much more compelling than the Z150s I was shooting on at the time, especially at twice the price, and that's why I never really invested in that camera much. I did rent one on a few occasions, but again, I just didn't find that to be particularly compelling, and the low light sensitivity on that one wasn't as amazing as I was led to believe by some of the people who actually have owned it. And so ultimately I decided I was just going to pass on that camera. But the 200 does have enough cool things about it that I decided that yes, this needs to be my primary camera moving forward. Alright, in terms of overall usability of the camera, I've been actually quite happy with it. I find that ergonomically it works really well. It's comfortable in the hand. I mean, it's a little heavy to be holding for long periods of time, just right there with your hands instead of using a tripod or whatever. But it's not too bad. You know, it's a little over 4 pounds. I forget the exact weight, but it's kind of in that same, I don't know, same area, same range as the other cameras that I've been using before, the Z150. Not a lot of difference between those two in terms of the size and weight, but it works pretty well. It does get a little bit warm, but not where you're holding it. So it's more in the back where it has, I'm guessing, a lot of the processing that's going on. It does get a little bit warm. There is a fan inside of it that seems to want to run most of the time. Fortunately, it's very quiet. I mean, I've had this camera sitting right here in front of me the whole time I've been talking, and the fan has actually been running. And so if you're not hearing it through my microphone, then you wouldn't hear it in person either. I like a lot of the other ergonomic changes that they've made, where I'm able to navigate the menu through the left side of the camera rather than having to do it up top. That was always a little bit weird on the 150. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that any longer. I like that it has a quarter, actually do the overhead shot here. I like that it has the 1/4 inch on the top in addition to a couple of shoes. It might have been kind of cool if the shoe in the back here was a hot shoe. The front one is hot, but the back one is just a cold shoe. That is buried in the packaging. By default, that's actually a 1/4 20. It's nice to have all that. I like that the buttons have programmable buttons here up on top. I've actually reprogrammed the button here to be a quick tap gives me the abbreviated menu, or a tap and hold gives me the full menu, and the fact that there's a joystick right there makes it really easy to adjust the camera settings of the camera when I'm out carrying it or whatever. It's super convenient to have that there. And then I have the button 10 set up to be that direct menu, which controls the different shooting parameters right there on the screen that I kind of demonstrated early on in this video. So super handy there. One of the things that I love about this camera most, and I'll switch to the in-camera view, is its super slow zoom. Let's see if I can actually get this to zoom at its minimum speed. There you go. You can see just how incredibly slow that zoom is, which is something that always bugged me about the 150. The 150's slowest zoom speed is just way too fast. I can actually use this live in a shot in an event where a slow pace is appropriate. So very impressed with how incredibly slow that actually is. Now the downside to this is that because it uses LANC for remote control, that super slow speed it becomes one of your only 7 available different speeds. And so therefore, when you're using a zoom controller, if you want to include that super slow speed as one of the speeds that you actually use, that means that the jump from that to some of the other speeds is much bigger than it has been in some other cameras. With what I've seemed to have noticed with LANC, 1 and 2, speeds 1 and 2 are pretty slow, and then the jump from 2 to 3 is actually pretty significant, which makes it a little awkward when you're trying to use the rocker style zoom controllers, kind of like the one that I demonstrated here on the channel just a little while ago. That when you're pushing on the rocker, you find that the zoom is almost not moving at all, and then all of a sudden it jumps up to speed 3 as you're pushing a little bit harder, and then all of a sudden it's moving maybe a little bit too fast. And if you're not super careful about where you maintain that pressure on that rocker, you might find that it's alternating back and forth between speeds 2 and 3, which means super slow crawl, and then much faster, and then back to super slow crawl. And for that reason, I would think that using a push button style zoom controller, which has become my preference whenever using LANC, specifically because of this whole 7-speed issue, is going to make a lot of sense on this camera as well. So even though I do really like that zoom controller that I demonstrated here on the channel back in December, it does have the same issue that all the rocker ones do, where it can at times be hard to maintain a consistent speed while you're zooming in or out. So it's more useful for reframing than it is for using a zoom as a motion shot, just because of that potential issue. So something to keep in mind. It's just because of Sony using LANC. I doubt they'll ever get away from that, because they seem to be the ones that created the issue. But hopefully at some point they'll supplement the zoom speed command with this part of LANC and give us something that's a little bit more flexible, gives us a little more granularity, and is able to vary the zoom speeds a little bit more than what we can right now. Alright, so I'm going to finish the rest of this video here on the Z200 instead of going back to my Z90. Overall, I am actually really impressed with this camera. I'm super happy that I got it. Obviously, if I bought 3 of them, gone out of my way to buy 2 additional after I got my first, and I will, again, rushing to get as many of these as I might need here before too long. So, very happy with it. It's not without some quirks. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a few steps closer to perfection than the other cameras that I've used in the past. And at $4,000 is really kind of a steal for everything that you're getting. And I think Sony's done a fantastic, phenomenal job on this camera. So if you're on the edge about whether you want to get one of these or not, just rent one. And they're actually easy to get. Most of the rental houses, big rental houses now, actually do have them, so you're able to get them. There is a bit of a waiting list a lot of the time, so make sure you're not getting close to an event day before you place your order for one, but they are available and you can try them out. But if you think this might be the right camera for you, just go ahead and buy it. And I'll have a couple links popping up here on the screen about places you can actually buy this camera, and I definitely very much appreciate when you use those links. It does help out the channel quite a lot. If enough of you use it, I can actually get the 4th one of these things that I'm actually wanting quite a bit. In terms of the difference between this and the NX800, it really comes down to whether you need SDI or not, I think, for most people. So if you're going to be able to benefit from SDI or Timecode, either one, then it's probably going to make sense for you to just go ahead and get the Z200. But if those are not important to you, you're not doing live event work where you're going into a switcher to switch between cameras, not doing multi-camera production, or if HDMI is going to be all right for you, yeah, you can save yourself several $100s by getting the NX800. Now, other than the connectivity, you're not really missing much. Alright, so if you have any questions about this camera, you can certainly leave those in the comment section down below, and I will do my best to try and answer them. But if you want to get into a more lengthy discussion, something more than just a, hey, does the camera have this feature or whatever, probably better to join us over on Discord. And I've got my Discord server link there popping up on screen. You can use that. Totally free to join, doesn't cost anything, and it's a pretty healthy community of people who are very intelligent and know the stuff inside and out. In a lot of cases, better than me. And they're very helpful. I see a lot of discussions going on there all the time between other members of the community, helping out people who are new and learning how to do all this kind of stuff. And it's a great community, very friendly, very helpful. So please consider joining us over there. That's probably about it for now. So thanks everybody for watching. And I will be doing a video here about the monitor and control app that Sony has for controlling this camera remotely here before long, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And for anybody who is a Patreon supporter or a YouTube member, I will be doing have not yet edited a behind the scenes video for one of the events where we use these cameras here just a couple of weeks ago. So as soon as I have a chance to edit that, that will be posted over there. So be on the lookout for that. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. And we'll have... Okay, thanks everybody for watching, and have a fantastic day.